Mostly, I look forward to my weeks with the kids. They're chomping at the bit for Christmas, even though it's not even Halloween yet. She laughed with me, and I couldn't help admiring her tight figure, bright green eyes, and shining auburn hair. It surprised me a little to realize that she was checking me out, just as I was doing to her. Mandy had been dating someone the last I'd heard, but perhaps she was single now. Her next words proved she was thinking along similar lines. "So are you seeing anyone now, Dawn?" "Nothing serious," I said, shrugging again. "Honestly, I just haven't clicked with anyone, you know?" "I do know," she said, leaning forward and touching my arm, gently. Mandy was taller than Britt by at least 7 inches. The top of her head came up to about the nose. That meant she didn't have to step way back to be able to look me in the eye. I liked that. In fact, I thought privately, I bet I could get to like her just generally. She was attractive, smart, funny, and she was probably a real handful in bed, too. Her soft laughter pulled me away from my private perusal. "Do you like what you see, Dawn?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Yes," I said, quietly deciding to go for it. "I like what I see very much, Mandy, and I'm wondering if you have any dinner plans tonight." "As a matter of fact, I don't have any plans for tonight," she replied, stepping closer to me. "Then how about you come over to my place and I'll cook for you?" I suggested, gently wrapping an arm around her slender waist and gently pulling her against me. "After that, maybe we can talk about some dessert." My relationship with Mandy did a lot to restore confidence that I hadn't realized I'd lost. She was an inventive and responsive lover. She was even smarter than I'd originally thought, too. She was funny, and she was good with the kids. She was also a wonderful listener and friend. We agreed to be exclusive after our 3rd date, and I never regretted it for a moment. There was just something about this woman that I found irresistible. With her, I had the companionship I'd been missing for so long. I guess you could say that she made me feel complete, if that doesn't sound too sappy. Regardless of whatever terminology sounds best, I was happy, really happy, for the first time since the divorce. Mandy and I had been together for several months when I got a surprise call from my ex-in-laws. "Hello," I said. "Hello, Donald. This is George Carson." "Yes, George. What did you want?" I asked, less than enthusiastically. At one time, I'd liked George a lot, but that had come to an end during the divorce. I admit, my making Brittany a star in the world of adult films hadn't helped. But hey, these things happen when you're dealing with a man that thinks he has nothing to lose. "I wanted to let you know that we have the kids at the moment," he said. "Brittany is in the hospital, and Virginia and I would like to stay with her. Would you mind coming to get them?" "Of course not. When would be a good time?" I asked. George didn't reply for a moment. He'd probably been expecting me to ask why my ex was in the hospital. That was silly of him. Why the hell would I care? "Any time is fine, really," he said at last. "But if you don't mind, I was hoping you could get them by 6 tonight." "No problem at all," I said. "I'm not occupied at the moment, so I'll come over straight away." "Don't you care at all that Brittany is hospitalized?" he asked, before I could end the call. "No, not really," I said. "Not unless it's something contagious that could hurt the kids." "It isn't, is it?" "No," George said, heavily. "She's not in that kind of hospital. She's in Catherine's Center." Ah, I thought to myself. Catherine's Center was a psychiatric hospital, although in today's PC climate, it would never have done to actually call it that. They called it a mental wellness and stress clinic. Okay, whatever. "Well then, as long as it doesn't affect the kids, I couldn't care less," I said, unflinchingly, and ended the call. I finished what I was doing, locked up the office, and hurried off to the Carson house. It was about a 20-minute drive, and as I drove, I thought about Brittany. I didn't do that very often, unless it was a nightmare about seeing her in that damn 3-way. Now, though, I found myself wondering again why the little turd had ruined our marriage and torn our family apart. I'd pondered that on my own many times since the divorce, but I'd never bothered to ask her about it. I didn't trust or respect my ex, and I didn't think she would tell me the truth, anyway. I'd gone over the usual reasons cheating spouses gave for their behavior, and I'd discounted most of them. Here are some of the possible reasons I considered for her cheating. 1. Looking for a bigger dick. No. I'd seen Benny's equipment, and he was no bigger than me. 2. Wealth. No, I don't see it. Oh, Ben had been well off, sure, but so were we. We'd had a very respectable savings account. We had a nice house in a great neighborhood. We didn't worry about paying our monthly bills or about dealing with repairs. We weren't rich, but we certainly weren't hurting. 3. Unsatisfying sex life. No way. We had sex at least 3 times a week, sometimes more. I was always ready and willing to try something new. More than once, Brittany had asked me to try a different position or role-playing, and I never refused. Hell, I even let her tie me up once because she was really excited about the idea. So no, I didn't think that was it. 4. Abusive spouse. Not just no, but hell no. I had never raised my hand to her. 5. Spouse is cheating. No, I'd never so much as touched another person since we'd agreed to date each other exclusively. 6. She had decided she was gay. No, even though she was letting Jamie go down on her and was, by the looks of it, enjoying it immensely, she didn't object to taking Ben's tool. She never refused me, either. That being the case, I just don't think that's the answer. So why? I don't know, and it didn't matter anymore. The second I saw her having sex with someone other than me, our marriage was over. Infidelity is unforgivable to me. If you don't have it in you to be faithful, don't commit. Yes, folks, it really is that simple and easy. These days, society is very accepting of people who don't marry, so there is no reason to get married and then cheat. If I had forgiven her and stayed with her, I would have lost every single speck of self-respect I had. My arrival at my ex-in-law's place finally stemmed the depressing tide of my thoughts. Their front door swung open as I drove up the gravel drive toward the house. Danielle and Brian were waiting by the time I got out and made my way to the door. I could tell instantly that not all was well with them. Brian stood very close to his big sister. For her part, Danielle had one arm wrapped protectively around him. The kids got along well with each other, but that certainly wasn't typical behavior. Behind them, George stood, one hand resting on each of their shoulders. He was watching me with a bitter, angry look as I walked up the short flight of stairs. As I reached the porch, he leaned down to the children. "Kids," he said gently, "I need to talk to your dad for just a minute. Would you please go inside and make sure you have all of your things ready to go? One of us will come get you when it's time to leave." "Okay, Pawpaw," Danielle said for both of them. They turned and went inside, leaving me on the porch with their grandfather. He gave me a hateful glare, the likes of which I had never seen from him before. I simply looked back neutrally, waiting for him to get whatever it was off of his chest. "What the hell is wrong with you, Dawn?" he said at last. "Other than a mild case of nearsightedness, I'd say there's nothing wrong with me. Thanks for asking, though. Quit being a smartass." "You know what I mean," he snapped angrily. "Your wife is in a mental hospital, and you don't give a damn." "First, she's not my wife." I snapped back. "She crapped all over our marriage of her own free will, and she did it with full knowledge of the consequences. And second, you're right, I don't give a damn. I see no reason why I should, nor do I see why you're so pissed off about it. I didn't cheat on her. She cheated on me, doofus. It's all your fault that she's hospitalized," he came back. "You posted that video on the internet. You ruined her reputation so completely. She's had a horrific time getting a job that will pay her what she's worth. I told your stupid spawn I was going to do it if I didn't get what I wanted. She was warned ahead of time, but she decided to fight me anyway. She reaped the consequences. And by the way, if she isn't earning what she's worth, she should talk to her pimp about it," I said, coldly. "Or is she working freelance?" "You son of a bitch," he shouted, grabbing a handful of my reflector vest. I grabbed the older man's wrist and easily removed his hand from my clothing. I did everything I could to be gentle. I had no wish to injure him, but no one manhandles me, and that's all there is to it. "Think very carefully before you try getting physical with me, George," I said, softly and calmly. "I know you love Brittany, but the truth is that everything that's happened to her recently is her fault. You can blame me for whatever you want, but even you must realize the truth. Besides, if it had been you, wouldn't you have done the same thing I did?" I held his wrist firmly until he finally relaxed his arm. I released him and stepped carefully back. He looked more defeated than anything else, but I wanted to make sure he didn't try to swing at me. "I don't know. Maybe I would have," he said. I guess it's just easier to be angry at you than it is to admit that my daughter." He broke off and shook his head in furious denial. After taking a few moments to collect himself, he looked at me again and took a deep breath. "Will you at least let me tell you what's going on?" he said. "Fine, go ahead," I said, exasperated. If George noticed my tone, he elected not to mention it. "Brittany tried to kill herself," he said, flatly. "Do the children know what she did?" I asked. "Yes," he said, closing his eyes in pain. "Danielle is the one that found her mother unresponsive on the bed and called 911. Brittany had apparently deliberately taken an entire bottle of sleeping pills. When she didn't come out of her room when the kids got home, Danielle went in to check on her. He sighed heavily and scrubbed his eyes with his hands. His shoulders heaved slightly, and I felt a slight tinge of sorrow for him. He wasn't responsible for what his daughter had done to me, after all. I felt absolutely terrible for my children, though. I honestly can't imagine what Danielle must have felt when she found her mother like that. I was also proud of my little girl for not losing her head in a crisis and doing the right thing. I made a special note to myself to tell her so. How are they dealing with what happened? I asked George. Danielle and Brian are both horribly upset, but I think it's actually been worse for Brian, said George. Danielle hasn't left his side this whole evening. I nodded my head, slowly. Okay, thank you for telling me. I'll keep a close eye on the two of them, I said. Over the next few days, I did exactly that. I spoke with both of them about what had happened with their mother. I also praised Danielle for her quick thinking and calm in the midst of crisis, which brought a happy glow to her young face. After a few weeks of treatment, Brittany was released. She was pronounced cured, I guess, but I didn't buy it. I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but I don't see how simply talking to a professional and maybe popping some pills could solve issues so serious that she thought killing herself would solve them. She insisted that we return to the shared custody arrangement that we've been following all this time. I asked my children what they thought about that idea. Danielle clearly had reservations, but Brian was eager, almost jumping up and down to spend some time with his mom. Unless you're willing to go back in for another long, drawn-out court battle, you'll have to give her what she's asking for, Mandy said, when I told her how I felt. You might be able to convince a judge you're correct. After all, a suicide attempt is pretty strong evidence of being an unfit parent. Mandy's voice was calm, but her eyes were another story. The way they bored into me, it was pretty clear how she felt. My own feelings were mixed. I was still furious with Brittany. I couldn't stand the thought of giving her access to the kids again. But Brian, at least, had made his wishes clear. He wanted to go back to spending time with his mother as well as me. Danielle, I knew, would go along with her brother in order to keep an eye on him. She had turned into a little lioness where he was concerned. In other circumstances, it would be cute. I'm not going to try and make it so Brittany can't see the kids, I said, finally. Mandy's gaze softened. No, I didn't think you'd be like that, she said. But on the other hand, I don't want either of the kids to have to deal with the trauma of their mother trying to kill herself again. I said, I don't know what happened to her that turned her into such a selfish, irresponsible bitch, but there's no denying it happened. Mandy leaned back on the couch next to me, her expression pensive. Then, she sighed, softly. How about we talk about something more pleasant than her? I suggested, caressing her arm. Mandy smiled and kissed me lightly. I'm always up for talking about something pleasant, she said. What did you have in mind? This was it, the moment of truth. I'd only grown closer to Mandy over the last few months. She was everything I wanted in a woman. She spent most nights here at home with me, sharing my life, even during my weeks with the children. Finally, I decided it was time to pop the question. It was only the second time in my life I had done this, and I was nervous as hell as I slipped the ring box out of my pocket. I thought we might talk about our future, I said. Mandy, I love you, and so do the kids. I love being with you, and I hate being apart from you. Mandy, I opened the ring box and held it out to her. Will you marry me? Her eyes grew huge as she stared into the ring box. I had told the kids about my intentions. Not only had they approved, they helped me choose this ring. Mandy's eyes rose from the ring box to look at me, and her gaze was sad. That hadn't been what I'd expected. She stretched out her hand and gently closed the lid of the box. Dawn, it's a very beautiful ring and I'm touched. I really like you. But, marriage? Really? Mandy gently shook her head. Dawn, honey, you're a wonderful lover, and from what I've seen, you're a great father to your children. You are a good man, and you've treated me like a princess since we've been together. You'll be a good husband, but not for me. I sank back into the couch. I don't understand. If I'm really a good man and all that, why don't you want to marry me? I asked. I felt like we meshed so well together. We could be really happy together and build a wonderful life. But Mandy was shaking her head at me, her eyes sad. She gently reached out and stroked my face with her hand, brushing away a tear I hadn't even realized was there. Dawn, honey, it isn't all because of you, Mandy said, softly. Part of it is me. I'm not sure I even want to get married at all, but if I ever do, it will not be to a man that already has children and an ex he has to deal with on a regular basis. We've had a lot of fun together, Dawn, and I don't regret 1 second of the time we've spent together. But, she paused, looking at the floor briefly, then she looked me in the eye again. Don, for me, that's all this was, just fun. I asked to be exclusive with you because I hate condoms, and I don't want an STD. It wasn't because I wanted to get married. I'm not sure, but I think the crushed remains of my heart jammed against my diaphragm. That must have been what caused my breath to catch in my throat, but I didn't make a sound. She'd already started shredding my feelings. I might as well let her finish the job. Looking back on it now, I understand why you felt that being exclusive meant more than just a good time. I'm sorry, I truly didn't mean to lead you on. In fact, it never occurred to me that you might want to get married again, considering what happened to you, she said. I see, I said quietly. I pulled my hand back and stared down at the ring box still resting in my palm. I sighed, shrugged, and casually gave the thing an over-the-shoulder toss, not really caring where it landed. Thanks for being honest with me, Mandy, I said. I'm sorry I bothered you with my troubles. Please forget I said anything about, I already knew it was pointless to try any kind of apology. Mandy was already picking up her coat and purse. Knowing what was coming, I got to my feet and met her by the door. I opened it for her and watched as she stepped through. She paused there on the threshold for just a moment and looked up into my eyes. It felt like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. We shared that gaze for a moment before I leaned in to kiss her goodbye for the last time. She turned her head so my kiss landed on her cheek. Wow, I thought to myself, I'm not even worth returning a last kiss. I knew then that there was no hope whatsoever for us. So I stood back and closed and locked the door behind her. The weeks after Mandy's departure from my life were hard. I'd been dumped before, not counting my ex-wife's rather spectacular ending of our marriage. It had happened several times. But for some reason, with Mandy, it hurt more than most of the previous instances had. Maybe it's because she was the first woman I connected with emotionally and not just physically. At first, the children asked me about Mandy's departure from our lives. They asked why she said no, why she didn't want to see us anymore. I told her that it wasn't them, it's just that she didn't want to see me anymore. Danielle, who just turned 10, was very perceptive for her age. I think, judging from the look in her eyes, that she might have deduced more of the truth than what I was willing to say. If so, she was kind enough to let me get away with my edited version. As the weeks went by, my son Brian did his best to mention his mom almost every day, when it was my turn to have him and his sister. Of my two children, Brian was the one who missed our old family life the most. I wasn't surprised that he was trying in his own childish way to get his mom and dad back together. I think a certain amount of that is to be expected. All I could do was keep on with my life. Yes, there were dates, and yes, some of them had happy endings. After the experiences I'd had, I made sure that anyone I dated was on the same page with me. No more misunderstandings. It turned out not to be an issue anyway. None of the women I hooked up with wanted anything permanent with a man in my circumstances. There were some exceptions, of course. I dated a few single mothers who might have been interested in something more. Until I got to the part about the crazy, suicidal ex. Then they usually found an excuse not to go out with me. Some of them didn't want to expose their own child to that sort of drama. Others didn't want it for themselves, either. I guess I didn't blame them, but it did make for a lonely life. I still talked to Angela every now and then. She had divorced good old Ben, but she hadn't taken him to the cleaners, so to speak. She didn't want to keep the enormous house she'd shared with Ben. She said it was full of too many memories. Besides, she wanted a house that was a home, not a status symbol. So she and Ben had sold the house, split the equity, and each had purchased other homes, much like what had happened with me. She wasn't willing to sell her interest in Ben's real estate business, so she didn't push for the maximum child support she might have gotten. She also didn't quit working in the office, although she did do everything she could to minimize contact with her ex. I'll admit it, she was a stronger person than I am. There's no way in hell I would voluntarily spend that much time with Brittany. Nevertheless, she had my respect. Ben hadn't received as much celebrity status for his part in the homemade porno I'd uploaded. I'm not sure why that was, and I really didn't care. It didn't appear to have hurt his business any, or not that I could see, at any rate. Angela never mentioned it on during those times we spoke, and I sure as hell wasn't going to bring it up. I had other reasons for that, though. Angela never came out and attacked me for uploading that video. That would have been a little hypocritical of her. She had predicted I wouldn't get custody of the children unless Britt let me have it. And of course, we all knew Britt was never going to do that. Thus, the release of the video was inevitable. Still, I was perceptive enough to see how angry she was that I'd done it. She'd intended for me to use it as evidence in the divorce proceedings, and had been horrified when I said what I would actually do with it. I think part of her doubted I'd go through with it. In case anyone's curious, no, Angela and I never got together. We're just too different in too many ways to ever be happy together, and we're both mature enough to realize it. We are friends, though, and she was always there when I needed to commiserate with someone. Her son, Robert, who still allowed people to call him Robbie when his friends weren't around to hear it, is a frequent guest at my house, as he and Brian are in the same grade, at the same school, and got along well together. It was during one of her visits to my house that Angela found the ring box. I'd never bothered looking for it. After Mandy left, it was nothing to me anymore. Not worth looking for. Oh, I know I could have sold it and gotten some cash for it. I just could never motivate myself to do it. Angela found the thing lurking under the edge of the old Hoosier cabinet in the living room and brought it to me with a questioning look. I looked at the somewhat dusty box sitting on the coffee table and sighed. Angela's raised eyebrow was a wordless clue that she wasn't willing to let the subject go until I explained, so I gave a mental shrug. I told her about asking Mandy to marry me and what the results had been. Angela listened without comment. When the pathetic story was told in its entirety, she shook her head, sadly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dawn," she said. Thanks," I said. "But you don't have to be sorry for my failings. I'm just not a good judge of character when it comes to relationships. Truth is, the only woman on the planet that figured I was worth being with ended up being a cheater. Kind of ironic when you think about it." "Well, join the club," she said with a snort. "Obviously, I'm no better at picking men than you are at picking women." We both shared a brief, bitter laugh at that. But she was fibbing a little bit, and we both knew that as well. She had a man she was seeing exclusively. They'd been together about a month now. I don't know if she saw wedding bells in her future or not, but I'd met the guy, and I'd be real surprised if he didn't ask her at some point. Do you think that maybe the problem is me?" I asked, after a while. "I don't know, Dawn," she answered with the frank honesty I'd come to expect from her. "It could be that you've got some unresolved issues that are holding you back from connecting with anyone. I know the fact that you never found out why your ex cheated has been bothering you. Honestly, I don't know why you never tried to find out, but that's your business." She regarded me with an evaluating eye and frowned. "Your looks aren't the problem, that's for sure," she said, as she appraised me. I think I might have actually blushed a little. "Look, I'm not a professional, but I think you need to talk to her, Brittany. Do you really think talking to my ex would help my love life?" I asked, doubtfully. "Well, Dawn, at this point, what have you got to lose?" she asked. Good point," I admitted. "I guess it can't hurt." That Sunday, when I drove the children to Brittany's house, I got out with them instead of dropping them off. My son and daughter looked at me in amazement. I'd never gotten out of the car at their mother's house before. Brian looked excited, while Danielle looked concerned. "I just need to talk to your mother for a second," I told them both, firmly. "I'm not here to get back together with her, and I won't be starting any trouble either." "Okay, kids." The two of them nodded wordlessly as I strode up to the door ahead of them and knocked firmly. I knocked twice more before Brittany finally answered. She still took my breath away. She was as beautiful as ever, even wearing the uniform from the diner where she worked as the day shift manager. She let her blonde hair grow out some. It was wavy and was probably as soft and silky as ever. I didn't dare touch it to find out. "Why are you kids knocking when you know I leave it unlocked for you?" She stopped when she saw me standing there, her eyes wide in surprise. Then they narrowed in anger. "What you want?" she asked, barely civil. "I want to speak to you for a moment, please," I said. "About what?" she demanded. I wordlessly gazed at our two kids, who were still standing on the porch watching the two of us with a wide-eyed mixture of fear and wonder. She didn't appear to take the hint, so I spelled it out for her. "Can we please discuss it privately?" "Fine," she snarled. "Get in the house, you two." "Now," she began, as soon as they were in the house and the door was closed. What did the great and wondrous Donald want to speak to this poor sinner about? It must be something desperately important. "I want to know why you cheated on me," I said, simply. "What?" she asked, surprised. I said, "I want to know why." "I heard you, damn it," she snapped. "But why the hell are you asking me this now? It's been over a year, hell. It's been damn near 18 months. If you really cared about the reason, why didn't you ask at the time?" "I was so furious about what you'd done that I didn't really care why you did it," I answered honestly. "But now that I've had some time, I want to know, why did you destroy our marriage and family?" "You're gonna pin it all on me, huh?" "Well, you are the one that decided to have sex with other people," I said, in a reasonable tone. "I never cheated on you. I never even thought about it. What I had was too precious to me, and I always thought I could trust the love of my life. If you don't want to tell me, just say so, and I'll leave." I didn't really think you would tell me anyway. Brittany's blue eyes bored into me, her anger plain to see. I just couldn't understand the anger. Her circumstances were a result of her own actions. All she had to do was be a faithful wife, and none of this would have happened. How difficult was that? But hell, even if she couldn't do that, she at least could have divorced me before she started screwing around. At least if she'd done things that way, I wouldn't have lost all respect for her. But she couldn't even do that much for the man she promised to love and cherish, as long as we both shall live. I watched her face for a few moments, making note of the variety of emotions playing across it as clearly as images on a movie screen. At last, she seemed to resolve some sort of inner battle. Her eyes dropped to the porch for a few moments as she gathered her thoughts. Finally, she turned her face back up to look me in the eye. She faltered. For the longest time, I've had urges to be with another woman. Her voice was very, very quiet. I had to strain to hear her. Why didn't you do it in college, before we got together? I asked. I tried a couple of times, but I always chickened out, she said. I was afraid that my parents would somehow find out. And I was also afraid that my friends would think I was some kind of dyke, just because I wanted to experiment. After a few moments to collect her thoughts, she went on. Jamie used to talk to me when she came to the gym. She confessed to me once that she had also felt those urges. I told her she was lucky. These days, there's a lot less of a stigma attached to bisexuality in women. She could play around with someone without fear. I didn't realize at first that the woman she wanted to play around with was me. She looked into my eyes and gave me a humorless smile. One night when I was working the closing shift, she managed to catch me alone in the women's changing room. It was amazing the way she made me feel. I knew after that first time that I would never be able to give her up. So you decided you're gay? I asked, hardly able to believe it. I'd been so sure that wasn't the answer. But Brittany shook her head no. No, I'm not a lesbian, she said. But I am bisexual, certainly. She paused again, apparently trying to find the words to explain herself. There was more to it than that, though. I knew how you felt about monogamy, and I knew that even if I could give Jamie up, it wouldn't matter to you. That one time would be a deal breaker for you. Well, I admit you were right about that, I said. I made that pretty clear at the beginning. Yes, you did, she agreed. So it was that easy to just throw away all we'd built, the last 11 years, for a quick tumble with another chick, I said, flatly. I actually felt worse than before. I don't really know what I'd expected to hear, but it sure hadn't been this. I didn't say it was easy, Donnie, she said, and for the first time in ages, I saw something besides hate in her expression. Damn it, Brittany, it couldn't have been too difficult for you. After all this time, I still can't believe what you did, I said. In spite of my assurances to the kids, I could feel my temper flaring. After a second or two, I wrestled it back into its cage, but it wasn't easy. What about Benny the a-hole? I asked. Where did that stupid shit stick fit in? He's definitely not another woman. No, he's not, Brittany said with a sigh. He came into the gym and signed up for a spin class I was teaching. We started talking, and eventually he ended up being one of my personal training clients. He started talking to me about the time we spent together back in college. After a while, he started pressing me for what he called a little fun on the side. But I always turned him down. She paused in her recollections and turned away from me for a while. I didn't push her. What she was saying, sickening and hurtful though it was, had the ring of truth. If Angela was right, then I needed to hear it. All of it. At last she turned to face me again. Along with my fantasies about being with another woman, I also had fantasies about group sex. After the night Jamie and I made love to each other, the barriers to fulfilling my fantasies were shattered. I knew I was already screwed if you ever found out what I'd done. I also knew there was no way that you would ever go along with the idea of a three-way. Ben, though, was overjoyed at the idea, but he wanted a little one-on-one time with me first. So, I did him for a couple of weeks. Finally, I got my three-way. It was great, until you busted it up. For once, her voice was matter-of-fact, rather than accusatory. In a sick, twisted sort of way, I could see why she might feel that way. For what it was worth, she was correct. Her having sex with and yes, I noticed she said, made love. Jamie Keller was more than enough to end our marriage. With that in mind, why not fulfill her other fantasies? In for a penny, in for a pound, right? I shook my head. I almost wish I hadn't asked, I said. Angela thought that finding out why you cheated would make me feel better. Instead, it's just made me feel even more inadequate. I wasn't enough for you, and you didn't even have enough respect for me to tell me to my face. You just decided to go out and get what you wanted, and to hell with me." Brittany shrugged her petite shoulders. "It didn't really feel like that to me, Dawn," she said. "Or at least, I didn't think of things in those terms. I don't know if it will help to hear this or not, but the truth is that I just didn't think of you at all until I'd already done it. It was only afterward that I gave any thought to what the consequences might be. I truly didn't set out with the intentions of hurting you or destroying my marriage. My mom says that I'm a horribly weak person, and I guess she's right. I started to say something angry and then stopped myself. There was no point in it. I'd pretty much said it all by now anyway. In a strange way, though, I was starting to realize that Angela was right. Now that the initial hurt was wearing away, I actually did feel a little better. I'd learned that I hadn't pushed her away from me. Her own desires had led her astray. Her mother was right. She was horribly weak. To throw away 11 years of marriage, a good home and family, for a stupid affair, was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. But it wasn't my fault. "Did you ever love me, Brittany?" I asked quietly. "Of course I did," she replied. "Part of me still does, I guess. I mean, over and above the effect it's had on our 2 children, I regret hurting you, too. That must mean there's still some love there. Were you ever faithful to me?" I asked next. "Yes, I was totally faithful to you. Until that night when Jamie and I made love," she replied. "I'm afraid that for the rest of that whole year, I was a bitch." She dropped her head again and sighed deeply. "My therapist helped me see I was wrong to do what I did," she said, not looking up. Then her voice hardened with anger again. "You didn't have to wreck everything, though." She pointed an accusing finger at my chest. "You seriously damaged my relationship with my parents. You ruined my reputation so thoroughly that I can't get a job in my field anymore. I don't even think moving to another state will help. And you ruined my poor little Jamie, too. She won't talk to me anymore, but I've heard from others that she was smeared right along with me when you released that video. How could you do that to me? Hey, I told you ahead of time I was going to do it if I didn't get my way in the divorce. You could have avoided all that, but you chose to go with your stupid pride. You thought that I was a liar, like you are. I'm not, though. I do what I say I'll do. Of all people, you should have known that, Brittany. Don't even try to blame your problems on me," I said, indignantly. She shook her head, angrily. "No, you went off the deep end. You had to have your revenge because your stupid male ego was bruised. You got all but hurt because I needed more than you were willing to let me have." "No, Brittany," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "If that was the case, you should have come to me and told me to my face, like an adult, and gotten a divorce. I would have been horribly angry. I probably would have hated you, but I still would have respected you." I shook my head at my ex-wife contemptuously. "But instead of doing that, you decided to cut loose and be a worthless free hooker. You aren't even worth as much as a common streetwalker. At least they are honest about what they are, and they get paid. It terrifies me to think of something like you having a parental influence over 2 young, impressionable children. But the courts have had their say over that, and I can't stop it. I can only pray that your mental illness ends with you." I looked at her scornfully. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stared up at me. Damn it, I just knew this was a bad idea. There's just too much anger and hatred for us to have a civil conversation. Not that I had said anything I didn't believe, but I truly hadn't intended to get into it with her today. Oh well, I had the answers I was looking for, at least. I decided to leave and let Brittany wallow in her suffering. I turned to leave, but to my surprise, Brittany stopped me. "Don, wait, I have questions too," she said. "Like what?" I asked, disbelievingly. "Why were you so willing to give me up? Why didn't you fight for me?" "Fight for you? You chose to open your legs willingly and you decided that without a thought of the consequences to come. Don't you remember any of the talks we had while we were dating? The talks about infidelity and how it destroys families. I told you then that cheating was the only thing I could think of. That was a no questions asked split. I will never put up with that. You knew that before we were engaged, to say nothing of getting married. The second you had sex with someone else, there was nothing to fight for." She trembled slightly, and a soft sob escaped from her lips. But she stoically wiped her eyes and composed herself enough to ask her next question. "How did you find out?" she asked. "We were so careful, and you never break your habitual patterns." I snorted a humorless laugh. "Believe it or not, it was a total accident," I said. I went on to tell her the whole story of that terrible morning. As the tale wound on and on, her eyes gradually grew wider and wider. When I finally finished, she sank down onto one of the cheap metal chairs she kept on her porch. That story is so unlikely it almost has to be true, she said. Google Earth, of all things. I had a God's eye view of it, I said, bitterly, but with a certain amount of dark humor. Honesty compels me to admit that if it had happened to someone else, it would have been funny. Life is like that sometimes. Did you need to ask anything else? I asked, finally. No, she said, very quietly. She stared at me for a long moment. When she spoke again, she really surprised me, because she said some things I honestly never expected to hear her say. Don, I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. For my selfishness, she said. I know I have no right to be angry at you. My therapist says that the one I'm really angry with is myself. It just manifests as anger toward you. For what it's worth, I've told the children that our divorce was my fault, not yours. I didn't give them specifics, of course, but I did tell them that much. Thank you for saying that, Brittany, I said. It eases my mind slightly, for the children's sake, at least. And then I turned and left. It was the last time we would speak to each other face to face for a long time. Another year passed, and my love life, my lack of a love life, I should say, stayed about the same. I still had the occasional roll in the hay with a willing woman, but there was no relationship in the offing. There was rarely, if ever, an expectation of one. I'd just about resigned myself to a life of sex without love. Yes, I'm a hopeless romantic. Quit making fun of me. I've heard the phrase, time heals all wounds, many times in my life, and I guess there's some truth to it. Time seemed to be taking its sweet time, but I noticed that I was gradually letting go of my bitterness. I enjoyed my time with my children. Watching them grow and learn was one of the true joys in my life. Brian, even though he had just turned 10 years old, was already expressing interest in the family business. He loved helping me with the plants, and especially the Japanese-inspired rock and sand gardens. Danielle seemed to be gravitating more towards a career in healthcare, although there was plenty of time for her to change her mind, too. She was only 12. And speaking of her tender age, it seemed she was beginning to discover that boys aren't necessarily the gross, icky things she used to think they were. Some of them were fascinating. I knew that stage of her growth was coming along soon, but I hadn't expected it to arrive just now. It was my enhanced protectiveness towards Danielle that led me to volunteer to be a chaperone for the kids' school sock hop that fall. Well, honestly, Angela and her new husband, Mike, also worked hard to get me to agree to help out, too. If you have kids that age, you probably know for yourself how hard it can be to get parents involved in that sort of thing. So, there I was, watching a bunch of kids getting sugared up and bouncing around the school's gymnasium. The music was incredibly loud, and, well, I'll spare you all my opinion on the quality of the music. I guess that, even though I'm only 37, I'm officially old-fashioned now. I don't even know the name of the other guy who's singing in Van Halen. Oh, come on, that was funny. I was focused on the kids, almost to the exclusion of all else, in fact. That's probably how Angela startled me so badly. Hey, she said. What? I said, a little sharply. I hate admitting when someone startles me. Why don't you go talk to her? She replied. Angie, what are you talking about? That teacher over there. The pretty brunette in the cream and charcoal sweater. Angela said. She's hardly taken her eyes off of you once, this whole evening. Things will be wrapping up in another 30 minutes, so go while you have a chance. I gave her a confused look. Looking at me? A woman? Angie had to have things wrong. I discreetly scanned the gym and spotted the woman she was talking about. She was indeed a brunette, and she was more than just pretty, in my opinion. She was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, and well tan like me. Yes, she was very attractive, there was no denying that. She wasn't looking at me, though I wouldn't mind if she was. After a moment, I turned to look at Angie. Are you sure she was looking at me? I asked, my disbelief obvious in my tone. I'm certain, Angela said, grinning widely. Trust me, Buster. A woman always notices these things. Go on, take a chance, Don. At the very least, you'll probably get a night of fun out of it. But you never know, there just might be something more. I shrugged. Why the hell not? I didn't have anything going with anyone else, and she really was a cutie. She was almost the perfect opposite of Brittany, physically. After just a moment, I decided to go for it. As if to spur me on, Angela smacked me on the back of the shoulder where no one else could see her do it. I'm going, I said very quietly to her. I made my way smoothly through the crowd of jumping children to where the pretty woman was standing. As I got closer, I could tell that while she wasn't old by any means, she was older than I'd first thought she was. I now guessed that she was about the same age as me. She certainly couldn't be any older than me. I could also see, as she turned herself toward me, that her eyes were a startlingly bright shade of green. I'd never seen eyes quite that shade of green before, and I wondered if they were her natural color, or if she were wearing contact lenses of some sort. "Hi," I said, as I closed the last few feet of distance between us. "I'm Don Summers. I'm Danielle's and Brian's dad." She smiled. Oh yes, she had a very nice smile at me and held out her hand. "Hi, Don. I'm Don Rogers," she said, as we shook hands. Don and Don, I thought with a mental laugh. That'll turn some heads at parties. "I'm Greg's mom, and I also teach 6th grade here," she continued. "Pleased to meet you, Dawn," I said, smiling. "Likewise," she said. "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but it's kind of unusual to see a single man as a chaperone at one of these." "I'm sure it is," I said, shrugging. "My kids are worth it, though. Besides, it's not like I've got anything else going on." I paused, curious. "How'd you know I was single?" I asked. "Well, your ring finger is unoccupied, for one. Also, that woman you've been hanging out with all night is here with her husband." She shrugged and continued, "I'm a decent observer when it comes to people, and you strike me as being unattached." "You're pretty good," I said. "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am unattached at the moment." She grinned up at me, and it was only then that I realized I was still holding her hand. "Oh, sorry," I mumbled awkwardly as I released her. "Don't be," she said, with another of her delightful laughs. "If I minded, I would have let you know." Her smile, as I noted earlier, was very nice. It lit up her face like a beacon and thoroughly enchanted me. Her eyes, whether it was that startling green color or some other facet of her, were hypnotizing. They sucked me in. Not only could I not look away, I had no desire to look away. After a few minutes, I finally managed to start talking again. Honestly, I hadn't felt such an intense interest in a woman since Mandy. We pointed out our children to each other and talked a little about each of them. I told her that Danielle was already talking about being a nurse and about Brian getting such a kick out of helping me with my work. Dawn told me about Greg's love affair with anything electronic and about some low-level trouble that love had led him to. Apparently, he thought he was some kind of hacker. I was so wrapped up in talking to Dawn that Angela got the drop on me a second time. "Damn it. Time to get the kids rounded up, Dawn," she said, with a grin at my discomfiture. "The DJ is already packing up his stuff." Together with the other adults, we started getting the kids ready to leave. After we'd made sure the right kid was with the right parent, we cleaned up and left. All of our children were beginning to come down from their sugar highs, and it looked like I might actually have a night of peace and quiet when I got home. As we were leaving, Dawn sidled up close to me. I was a little surprised when she linked her arm through mine as we walked the short distance from the school gym to the parking lot. "Call me some night when you have time," she said, slipping a folded-up piece of paper into my shirt pocket. "I'd love to have dinner with you sometime." And then she and her son made their way to their car, and she was gone. That night was a new start for me. As you might imagine, I didn't wait long to call Dawn. There was no way I could. She was absolutely captivating, and I couldn't get her off my mind. Our first dinner date didn't end in the bedroom, but it did include a few very nice kisses. She seemed to be as taken with me as I was with her, but that obviously didn't mean she was ready to simply throw all caution to the wind. I shouldn't have been any more ready to do that than she was, but if the chance had presented itself, I would have taken her to bed in an instant. I'm not the kind of man to push for that, though, so we took things at her pace. Dawn was a fascinating woman, in many ways. She was very intelligent, but she was also very practical. Like me, she didn't have a lot of cash to throw around, so she'd come up with many simple life hacks to save money. She shared them freely with me, thus helping me free up some always needed funds for other things. In turn, I'd learned that she was a frustrated gardener. She loved growing things, especially flowering trees and lianas. Sadly, she was cursed with a brown thumb. Luckily, I knew lots of techniques to nurse ailing plants back to glorious life, and I was perfectly happy to share them. I was also able to help her with just a few inexpensive tweaks and free labor, of course, to make over her backyard and patio, making it almost like an outdoor living room. The sex between us, when we finally took that step, was wonderful. Her body was soft and curvy, her skin was silky and smooth, and her scent was incredible. She wasn't athletic like Brittany or Mandy, but the connection I felt to her was a deep one. For the first time in a long time, I found myself thinking of it as making love rather than as just sex. We became more and more close to each other emotionally as well as physically. She told me about what she called her wild days. In her early 20s, she'd gone through a phase where she had screwed anything with an erection, as she put it. Just to be clear, those were her words, not mine. She'd contracted a couple of STDs, and then she'd ended up pregnant with Greg. That had been the catalyst of change for her. Seeing the face of her baby for the first time had had a great and humbling effect on her. She realized at that moment she would have to raise him by herself, as she literally had no idea who his father was. There were way too many candidates, and she wasn't going on Maury. Her parents were absolutely sickened by her behavior. Fortunately, they quickly came to love their grandson. They agreed to let Dawn move back in with them so they could watch little Greg while she finished college and got her teaching certificate. After that, her life turned around. I was the first man she'd allowed to have her sexually in nearly 2 years. I was frankly astounded that no one had drugged this woman to the altar in all that time, and I said so. She laughed at me and admitted that there had been 2 men in her past that had tried. They both turned out to be cheaters, but fortune had smiled on her. She'd found out about it well before making that trip down the aisle, thus saving herself a lot of pain. Of course, I told her about Brittany and then Mandy. To say she was stunned would have been a great understatement. Unlike other women I'd told the story to, she wasn't particularly bothered by my releasing the video on the internet. Her opinion mirrored my own. Actions have consequences, and she actually got off pretty lightly, all things considered. Dawn got along well with my children, and I have to admit, her son Greg was a good kid. The kids seemed to get along pretty well with each other, too. Greg was just a couple of months younger than Danielle, and they were in the same grade. Yes, things with Dawn were going extremely well. So well, in fact, that as our relationship reached the 8-month mark, I was once again considering marriage. Thoughts of the disaster with Mandy didn't slow me down for a second. I refused to let the past ruin my future. Of course, I knew there was a chance that she would say no, and I was ready to face that, but I didn't think she would. I did talk to my children about it, though. Danielle was greatly enthused about it. Brian was less so, but he agreed that it would be okay. Privately, I think he still harbored thoughts of me getting back together with Britt. I finally bought another engagement ring. I'd ended up selling the one I'd gotten for Mandy. Now all I had to do was decide how to ask her. After thinking about it and consulting with my mom, I decided to do it at my 40th birthday party in just 2 weeks' time. It wasn't going to be a huge affair, but my closest friends would be there, as would my parents, as well as Dawn and Greg. Yes, I thought that would be perfect. The only real challenges during that 2-week wait were getting the kids to keep the secret from both Dawn and Greg, getting a secret invitation to Dawn's parents and her brother, who was her only sibling, and not accidentally doing anything on my own to give it away. Finally, the night of my birthday party arrived. My actual birthday had been the day before, but I waited for a Friday night for obvious reasons. My parents had rented the party room at Misha's, a local restaurant that specialized in ethnic Russian food. I had a real weakness for pierogies. It was a nice place, but it wouldn't break the bank. It was also kid-friendly, which was an important plus. The dinner was excellent, and I enjoyed it immensely. We had a lot of fun eating and dancing. At last, though, it was time for presents. I opened them and thanked all the people who'd given them to me. Through it all, I did my best not to give away my plans. Dawn had been slightly surprised to see her parents and her older brother at the party, but she'd taken it in stride. As I finished unwrapping my last gift, I knew I'd achieved surprise. I set the last gift on the table and stood up. I wrapped an arm around Dawn and squeezed her gently against my side. She leaned her head against me as I smiled at everyone. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," I said, brightly. "You've all made this the best 40th birthday party I've ever had." There was polite laughter at my little joke, and I heard one of children complain that they didn't get it. The laughter resulting from that was excellent cover for Angela as she snuck up behind me and discreetly put the ring box in my free hand and slipped away just as sneakily. "There's just one last thing before we all take off. I've gotten a lot of presents tonight, but I'm hoping to get just one more," I said. "I'm hoping, in fact, that Dawn will give me the ultimate present." Dawn tilted her head up at me with a confused look on her face. I lovingly returned her gaze, locking eyes with her and grinning. "Dawn, I love you so much," I said. "You've made my life complete. The only thing that could possibly make it better would be if you gave me the gift of having you for the rest of our lives." I dropped to one knee and presented the opened ring box to her, all without breaking eye contact. "Dawn, sweetheart, will you marry me?" The private dining room went dead silent as everyone, including the kids, finally understood exactly what was happening. I gazed hungrily into my lover's eyes, waiting to hear her joyous cries of yes, yes. I waited, and waited some more. "Dawn?" I said, finally. "Honey, please, say something." She muttered, looking away from me and wildly darting her eyes around the faces in the room. Dawn, this really isn't a good time to talk about. Maybe we should, Dawn stumbled over her own words and backed away from me. I sighed and stood back up. I watched with a slowly breaking heart as Dawn hurried over to Greg, took him by the arm, and hurried out of the restaurant without even pausing to put on her coat. A few seconds after her hurried departure, I turned back and saw that most everyone was staring at me in shock. Well, I said, anyway, thank you all for coming and making this such a wonderful evening. Have a great night, everyone. I offered a big, fake smile and collected my things. As I put my coat on, I stared at the ring box where it sat on the table. I was strongly tempted to just randomly toss the thing as I'd done the last time, but I didn't. I might as well see about getting my money back. I tucked the damn thing in my coat pocket and gestured to me kids. Dawn, honey, my mom said, grabbing my arm lightly. Would you like us to take the kids tonight? I shrugged, not really caring. Do you guys want to spend the night with Nana and Pappy? Yeah, that'd be cool, Brian exclaimed. Dad, Danielle began. I'm so sorry, Dash. Thanks, Danny, but you don't have to say anything, I said, firmly squelching whatever she might have said. I wasn't ready to hear anything like that just yet, and thankfully she picked up on that fact. Just remember I love you, Daddy, she said, softly. She hugged me tightly, her little arms squeezing me as hard as she could. Then she turned, gathered her things, and followed her Nana out to their car. My dad lingered for a moment. So, strike three, huh, Dad? I said. Yes, strike three, son, he replied, matter of fact. Fortunately, life gives you more than just one turn at bat. There will be others down the road. Well, if nothing else, at least I've proven I still know how to pick the good ones, I said, with a bitterly sarcastic smile. Dad shrugged and sighed. Well, son, life takes a big fat shit on all of us at some point, he said. You aren't alone in that, I hate to tell you. All you can do is try to shrug it off and keep going. You go on and work off the stress however you see fit. Your mama and I will take care of the kids. And if you need to talk, you know we're always here for you. I took my things in hand and left while Angela and Mike were settling the bill. I could tell Angie wanted to talk to me, but thankfully, Mike stopped her. I know she just wanted to be a friend to me, but the last thing I wanted at the moment was a friend. The drive home was mercifully short. As soon as I got in the house, I double-locked the door, dumped my stuff on the sofa, and got started on a serious bender. It didn't last as long as I wanted it to. I don't keep any hard stuff in the house, and my beer supply wasn't up to the task. I considered walking to the liquor store down the street, but quickly dismissed the idea. Getting blasted would feel good, but I didn't need the hangover tomorrow. Instead, I sat in my recliner and binged on some 80s sitcoms on Netflix. After a few hours, I was feeling drowsy. I woke the next morning with a desperate need to pee and a wicked kink in my back from sleeping in that recliner. I had to remember not to do that in the future, I thought to myself, as I took care of my morning business, then showered. After drying off, I put on some clean clothes and then went in search of breakfast and some aspirin. I'd evidently had enough beer to manage a hangover after all. Damn it. As I scrambled my eggs, I tried hard not to think about Dawn. That hurt way more than my head did. What had gone wrong? I was so sure she'd felt the same way I did. Of course, my traitorous mind revisited the fact that I'd felt the same when I'd proposed to Mandy. Stupid mind. I decided then and there that I was done with the whole concept of marriage. From this point on, sex buddies were the path to the future. I finished my breakfast and cleaned up the mess. Then I spent a little time in the basement, using the weight bench. The pure physical exertion was just what I needed to work off some stress and anger. After that, another shower was in order, so I took care of that. As I was drying off afterward, I remembered that I hadn't turned my cell phone back on after last night. I turned the thing on, and sure enough, my voicemail box was full. There were also a bunch of texts. I skimmed the texts first and found them all to be from friends, and all expressed some version of sympathy and offers to talk. The voicemails were more of the same, except for one, from Dawn. It was only a couple seconds long, and it simply said, "I'm sorry, my love. Please believe I have my reasons. Hopefully you'll understand and forgive me someday. Goodbye." I didn't return any of the messages or calls. I spent the rest of the day watching TV until my parents brought the kids home that night. So, that's basically my life story. In a lot of stories that I've seen here, the cheated-on husband ends up rich, married to a supermodel who's 15 years younger than him. Some get married to single moms expanding their families and desperate to have his babies, living in a mansion, and eating steak for every meal. while their exes regret their decisions, rot in jail, or worse, still turn into soup. I like those stories as much as anyone, but I'm afraid that isn't what my life's been like. It's been 10 years since my divorce from Brittany. Danielle is in college, studying nursing. I was a little surprised she stuck with it all those years, but pleased. Brian has just graduated high school and will start college in the fall. He's going to be a business major. Will he want to join the family business? Only time will tell. I'm 45 now and still single. I have the occasional rendezvous for a little bedroom fun, but there's no one in my life I would call special. A year ago, Mandy strayed back into my life. Kind of, anyway. She was just after a good time. Only this time around she made that clear from the start. We had fun together on a regular basis for about 2 months, and then she moved on with no hard feelings. She asked me why I never got married, and I told her the truth. It's not worth the risk anymore. I would love to have a wife. I'd love to wake up next to the same face every morning and know that she was mine. To know that she'd be there for the rest of her life. But some stories don't have happy endings, and, for now, it looks like mine will be one of those. Dawn's parents told me that she moved away about a year after my disaster of a marriage proposal. Before you ask, no, I didn't go looking for the info. They came to me, hoping I could convince her to move back. I thought that was crazy, seeing as how the thought of being with me is probably what drove her away to begin with. I don't know that for certain. Dawn never bothered to tell me her reasons, and I just don't care enough to ask. So just screw her. Brittany, on the other hand, did eventually get married. She, and my son Brian, spent several years trying to work out some kind of reconciliation between her and I, but that just wasn't going to happen. I don't believe that people change who they truly are. Britt was a cheating bitch, and no amount of regret, sorrow, or psychotherapy mumbo-jumbo would ever change that. Eventually, they gave up and she married the owner of the diner where she worked. The kids say they're happy. Good for them. I hope for his sake. He made the bitch sign a prenup. She's still a very, very attractive woman. My father died a few months ago, leaving the business to me. I'm sorry to say that I don't think my mother will be here much longer. She's grieving too intensely. The agony of Dad's loss is plain in every look she gives me, in every word she speaks, and in every motion of her body. The kind of loving, devoted marriage they shared was what I always wanted for myself. But maybe that kind of thing isn't possible in our modern world. I don't know. I'm a landscaper, and philosophy is something I'll leave to the experts. Before she left me the second time, Mandy asked me an interesting question. Do you have any regrets? She'd said. Well, yes, of course. I regret that I married a cheating bitch. I regret that I wasted time on Mandy, the first time, and Dawn, thinking that they were potential mates. I regret that I just can't seem to meet anyone with the same values and desires that I have. But then, I know what Mandy was really asking. What she really wanted to know was whether or not I regretted making Britt a famous amateur spicy star. She wanted to know if I regretted divorcing her as fast as I possibly could and hating the bitch for years afterward. The truthful answer is no. I regret that the release of the video was necessary, but I don't regret doing it, and I never will. She had it coming. If I had it all to do over again, I would do it all the same. Maybe I saved a bit of trouble for her new man. If so, then at least some good came out of it. As for me, I'll keep working. I'll keep loving my kids and watching them grow. I'll look forward to meeting my grandkids, when and if the time comes. I will never completely abandon the search for a wife of my own. Like I said before, you have to seek if you're going to find. But it's no longer a priority for me. I will enjoy what happiness I can find, when and where it can be found. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it isn't a bad life. And yes, during my downtimes in the office at work, I still occasionally indulge in a bird's eye view. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.